In 1959, the United States Army began cutting a city into the Greenland ice sheet. Not a base on the ice, a base inside it, 2 miles of tunnels, roofed over and buried. It had a hospital, a chapel, a cinema, and a barbershop, and it ran on its own nuclear reactor. The public was told it was a research station. That was not the reason it existed. 6 years later, the army left it where it was and assumed the snow would cover it forever. The science they did there is the reason we now know that assumption was wrong. Start with why anyone would build in the middle of an ice sheet. Look at a globe rather than a flat map. The shortest line from Moscow to Washington goes over the Arctic. Greenland sits almost exactly in the middle of that line. The Americans already had a large air base on its northern coast at Thule. From there, bombers could reach the Soviet Union and radar could see missiles coming. But an airfield can be seen, and anything that can be seen can be targeted. What the army wanted was somewhere nothing could be seen at all. The method was simple, and that is what made it possible. Machines cut long open trenches straight down into the ice, some of them 30 feet deep. Steel arches were laid across the top, and the snow was blown back over them. Within days, the drifting snow sealed the roof, and the trench became a tunnel. 21 of those trenches were cut, connected into a grid. Prefabricated buildings were assembled inside them, standing free so the ice could not touch the walls. From the surface, there was almost nothing to see, a few hatches and some pipes. Then the part that made it more than a shelter, a camp that size needs power, and shipping diesel across an ice sheet is slow and expensive. So they brought a nuclear reactor in pieces on sledges pulled across the ice. It was the first portable nuclear power plant ever built, and it was assembled in a trench. It went critical in October 1960 and powered the whole camp heat from it. Also melted a well straight down into the ice which supplied the water. For 3 years, a couple of hundred men lived under the ice on nuclear power. Life inside was stranger than the engineering. The tunnels held their temperature. Outside it could be -40. Inside it was steady. There was a library, a laundry, a chapel, and a small theater. Boy Scouts were flown in for a visit and the newsreels loved it. It was presented as a future, the Arctic made habitable, the frontier closed by engineering. Almost none of that was the reason the money had been approved. The real project had a name that was not used in public: Iceworm. The plan was to extend the same trenching method across the whole ice sheet. Not 2 miles of tunnels, 2,500 miles of them. Inside would run railway tracks, and on the tracks nuclear missiles, 600 of them moving constantly between hundreds of launch positions. The point was that nobody could know where any single one was at any moment. A first strike would have had to destroy the entire ice sheet to be sure. It would have been the largest military installation ever constructed. There was a problem with all of this, and it was not engineering. Greenland was Danish territory, and Denmark had a firm policy on nuclear weapons. They were not permitted on Danish soil. The Danish government had said so publicly. The Americans asked permission to build a research station and were given it. The missiles were not mentioned to the Danish government at any point. The people who approved the site did not know what the site was for. The plan failed, and it failed for a reason nobody in the room had taken seriously enough. An ice sheet is not a solid block sitting still. It flows under its own weight. It deforms slowly and constantly, like extremely cold molasses. trickle. The tunnels began to close within months of being cut. Ceilings sagged, walls moved inward, rooms had to be milled out again and again. By 1962, the room holding the reactor had to be recut to stop it being crushed. A tunnel that closes on its own cannot hold a railway and cannot hold a missile. So the project was quietly cancelled. The reactor was dismantled and taken out in 1963. The camp ran on diesel for another 2 summers, then was abandoned in 1966. Almost nothing was removed. Removing things from the middle of an ice sheet is expensive. The building stayed, the fuel tank stayed, the waste stayed. This was not carelessness in the ordinary sense. It was a calculation. Snow falls on that part of Greenland every year and never fully melts. The site would sink and be sealed. It is worth being precise about what was left, because the amounts are not small. Around 200,000 liters of diesel fuel, tens of thousands of liters of wastewater and sewage, frozen in place. Chemical pollutants from the electrical equipment of a kind since banned everywhere, and coolant water from the reactor, still slightly radioactive, poured into the ice, all of it about 40 meters down and sinking a little every year. The whole calculation rested on one assumption, that this part of Greenland only ever gains ice. Now, the part that turns this from a strange story into an important one. While the camp existed, scientists there did something nobody had managed before. They drilled straight down through the ice sheet to the rock underneath. It took years. The core came up in sections, and each section was older than the one above it. The deepest ice was more than 100,000 years old. Snow traps air as it falls, compressed into ice. It keeps that air sealed. So the core is a record of the atmosphere year by year going back before anyone existed. What that record showed was not what anyone expected. The assumption had been that climate changes slowly. Centuries, thousands of years, the East, the ice said otherwise. It showed the climate shifting sharply within a human lifetime. That finding is the foundation of everything we now know about how fast the climate can move. It came out of a hole drilled by an army camp built to hide missiles. The camp is the reason the core exists. The core is the reason we know the camp will not stay buried. The secret held for 30 years. In 1995, the Danish parliament opened an inquiry into American nuclear activity in Greenland. The documents that came out described Iceworm in full. Denmark learned from its own archives what had been built on its territory and why. Then, in 2016, a team of glaciologists published a study of the site itself. They modeled how much ice the area gains and loses, and when the balance would change. Their conclusion was that on current trends, the site stops gaining ice within this century, which raises a question nobody prepared an answer for. When it surfaces, whose problem is it? The United States built it and left under an agreement that said nothing about this. Denmark owned the territory but was not told what was there, and Greenland, which now governs itself, agreed to none of it and was not asked. The waste is not going anywhere. The ice above it is. They buried it because they were certain the ice was permanent. The proof that it is not came out of the same hole. There is a new one of these every week or two. Subscribe if you would rather know what was buried than what was published.